We are. Thank you, Yashodhanji. We are well past 9:30, or originally slated closing in time. So I would try to be as brief as possible. I'll just make 3 points, which I just wanted to say. Anshuman said factionalism is common to Maos. In fact, I have always believed that more radical an ideology, lesser is the tolerance for ambiguity. So any radical ideology will lead to greater fractures. You could see Islamists, you could see Maoists, you could see anybody. Because more radical an ideology is, you're not willing to accept even a slight deviation. And this is, of course, a very big chink in the armor of any radical ideology. And this can always be exploited if you tap it well. But for that, you need to understand the ideology always well. That's a very important thing. Secondly, there is no doubt that bulk of the tribals who are actually now fighting for the Maoists are not Maoists. They don't understand Marx and Lenin. But the fact is, they have had certain genuine grievances which have not been assuaged for decades. Praveer Chand Bhanjdev was killed in 1965. I have lived for 10 years in Bastar. Now, it was the most peaceful area till 70s. Now, it's been actually turned into a violent area. Now, there are, because justice is what is important. Now, there is a perception, right or wrong, that justice is not being delivered. Now, that is what is important, and Maoists have managed to tap into this discontent. Now, we need to bring in certain system whereby the justice is expeditiously delivered to those tribals who are actually illiterate, poor, at the margins of the society. Now, this justice has to be prompt and correct. Unfortunately, our bureaucratized polity and corruption, endemic corruption, have often contributed to denying justice to them. And last point I'd like to talk about CRPF and camping of 5,000 people. The fact is, the CRPF, or for that matter, any central police organization in India, is neither geared nor trained to fight the Naxal menace. Unfortunately, all these CRPF units are headed by IPS officers who come on lateral induction without having known either the men or the terrain or the job. We had the last incident where a large number of CRPF men were killed. Not a single senior officer was present. Is that acceptable? Is that the type of leadership that you want to go and engage committed guerrilla outfits? Not to my mind. The CRPF people are pitchforked from Kashmir to Chhattisgarh overnight, or from Assam to Telangana overnight, and are expected to fight without understanding the terrain. And the biggest and the worst problem is they don't even understand their officers, who have been brought in overnight from some other different cadre and appointed as their bosses. Now, those officers are used to policing in the districts where they are the big sahibs. They don't know how to move around in the jungles, lead their men. Now, that basic tactics of how to indulge in a counter-guerrilla operations is lacking. Now, with that sort of a thing, you are bound to have fiascos like this. I think a time has come. We need to look at the reorganization of the CPOs. The CPOs today are in dire need of reorganization. In fact, the whole police structure is in dire need of reorganization. Now, this is as far as the tactical issue is concerned. Most of the other issues, as you know, have been covered. But I felt this was very important because people must know that as long as we keep depending on CRPF, which is led by IPS officers who come on deputation from various states, you are going to have, unfortunately, such tragic results that you are going to see that happen in that particular incident. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'll be clubbing some of the questions in order to kind of save some time. And my next question will be to Dr. Behera. So thanks, Alokji, for mentioning about some of the tactical issues. But also we would like to think a little more about strategy here. And when we are thinking about long-term strategy, we want to have some people-centric approach. And as you said, like justice and human rights probably were the issues there. So what is the impact on the society there? What about the socio-economic indicators of the human development index of the society in those Naxal affected or Maoism affected areas? And that's what I would like to hear from Dr. Behera. Dr. Behera, your comments on this question.
Yeah, thank you, Yashodhanji. I would also like to thank Professor Pandit, Prafulji, and Alok sir for their Wonderful remarks. Okay, this also brings an important aspect. I absolutely take all these points made by the very responsible scholars here. But then one important thing that what you Praful Ketkarji also mentioned, the impact on the society, what the Maoists have done. Okay, this also actually links up to the very, very wonderfully conceptualized by Alok sir, that more the radical a particular organization, there is a more possibility of slight deviation, there is a faction, and this is what actually is the impact of the society, where you have the Maoist presence. Okay, so you have the example where Nandini Sundar was responsible for killing of a sarpanch. You will also be very, very disturbed to know in 2009, we had somebody called Arjun Kendruka in Koraput, who also actually fought the general election and was brutally killed by the Maoist in the post-election. Okay, and that is where you will see that the society in the Maoist affected areas are completely divided. Okay, so you have the examples of the Kandhamal riot. Okay, people give it a religious color of the Hindu versus the Christians. But let me tell you, as a social scientist and who have been actually following this for last 2 decades, I have been n number of times I have gone to Kandhamal. There was a wonderful kind of social bonding among the Kandhas and the Panas. Okay, the Panas are the scheduled caste and the Kandhas are the tribals. Okay, where the arrangement was like the Kandha Raja Pana Mantri, that the Kandhas are the kings and their brain are the Panas. Okay, this was the social kind of thing. With the Maoist, I have the recordings. I have also placed it before Nandini Sundar, the so-called experts on Maoism, that how the Maoist actually used the Pentecostals to kill Lakshmanananda Saraswati. We have the recordings. We have the recordings of the people who actually killed. Okay, so that is where you see the artificial division that the Maoists have created in the Kandhamal starting from 2008. It took actually solid 10 years for us to bring a kind of conciliation kind of thing among all these people. By 2017-18, they started talking to each other. This is the contribution of the Maoist. Similarly, if you come to the Narayanpatna areas of Odisha, where my next book is coming up, where the Dumbas, another scheduled caste group, actually have been completely displaced by the Kandhas. Okay, and they are all taking shelter. Some 600 families are taking shelter in the rehabilitation camps in Koraput, Jaipur, all these areas. Okay, this was unheard of in the forest areas of India, where the marginalized communities actually lived peacefully. That is where, when you go to Koraput Museum, you will see that when the Pandits visited the forest areas, okay, they make a mockery of the intellectual, saying that they are artificially creating the divisions among, and the Maoists have actually contributed enormously to these areas. Okay, so then coming to the human development aspects, you will be very happy to know that, okay, the demands of these people. Okay, when I say these people, I'm not othering. I'm putting them in a very high place. Okay, the demands of these our own people there, okay, is very less. Okay, they have not demanded like the things that is what the so-called people living in the urban areas do demand. Okay, the demands are not unfair. The demands are the simple things. What are the Jal, Jameen, and Jungle? Okay, now that what we have seen, that thanks to the Maoists, okay, they have given them the kind of false hope that they are fighting for them. In that process, they have captured their natural resources. So that is one hand, there is a larger perception that somehow the state has unfairly taken their land, what Professor Kasi Pandit was mentioning, that for the development purposes and all that. Okay, I would say there was a communication failure starting from 1948 till date. Okay, there has been a communication failure, and in this communication failure, the civil society organizations, okay, the so-called civil society organizations based in Delhi or the urban centers, they have played a major role in actually giving a false impression of the state. Okay, the Utkal Aluminium is a classic example. Okay, and I failed to understand in 2002 to 3 all this time what was the job of Arundhati Roy sitting in a small village in Utkal Aluminium, in Kashipadar and all these things. Okay, people hold her in a high esteem, but then when I started asking the people last couple of years, Okay, they say that she would actually give them few money. Okay, and they will campaign against the Tatas and the Birlas and the Mahindras. So that is where the human development, if you see, the health index is superb. Okay, you and me. Okay, if I go by the so-called the modern way of talking about the human development and all these things, you will not find them very sick. Okay, maybe the modern way of understanding human development they lack because they do not have cash in the bank. Okay, but then they don't need it. Okay, they have never complained for it. Okay, and there is a lot of this thing during when I was working in IDSA, that was a lot of debate that we need to bring development here. And this is the whole paradigm of development needs to be rethought. Okay, the whole identity of the tribal will go for a toss if you bring in so much of development. They don't need development. Okay, but at the same time, the Maoists do not represent them. Okay, that is something that needs to be very, very clear in the mind. There is a faulty development model. Yes, there is. But then there is a lack of communication. This needs to be sorted out. Okay, and how do you do it? Coming to Prabhul Ketkarji's thing, how do you do it? And then you do it when you take the local elites into confidence. Talk to the tribal leaders. Okay, we have not been able to talk to them. We have failed in certain ways in talking to the tribal leaders. We need to talk to them. Okay, and how do you talk to them? One thing is recruit their own people from their own society. Okay, simplifying the provisions of democracy to them. Okay, this is we are running out of time. There is a lot of thing I can say. Where they are given money in the paper notes, with the tribal never understood. They threw into the Kaveri and they came back. What to do with this? Okay, these are classic, the Machkund area, the Upper Kolab kind of thing. And you need a local guy who would actually translate all these things. And this is somewhere, we have failed. Okay, thank you.
I have one question for Prafulji, actually. It is said that local people don't support these kind of activities there, violent activities there. And media never really reports it. There is also a little bit of criticism of media that it sometimes romanticizes the violent Maoist movement, and that impacts the human development index. Why it is so, and where media is going wrong?
There are two aspects to this issue, Yashodhanji. As one of the very high-profile celebrity journalists has once used for the Northeast, the tyranny of distance. So most of the people do not even try to access. I know many Marathi journalists or Odia journalists, going to these areas and having access even with the locals. They have a, but unfortunately it never becomes a national kind of coverage. It is a very localized kind of coverage. So denial of human rights to the state is covered at the national level because these frontal organizations and the ideological mentors are sitting here either in media houses or NGOs or civil society activist groups in the name of human rights. So they will always talk about the state suppression of human rights, but they will never talk about the Maoist suppression of human rights. In fact, that perspective was even never allowed to develop. You cannot even ask about why, this Pathalgadi kind of thing, where outsiders not allowed to, enter. Why, central schemes are not allowed to be implemented as far as the development aspects are concerned. Maoists have, literally bulldoze many connectivity programs in these tribal areas, including the mobile towers. Now, that can be discussed and debated whether tribals really need mobiles. But as far as I know, they don't have internet, but they have mobiles. And if you communicate something, in fact, many of the tribals from Bastar area, they now come to Raipur, store their songs or even news in Gondi, and then go back to their villages. So there can be certain gaps, and that needs to be. But the obstacle now is perhaps the Maoists themselves and the way Maoists are functioning. The second aspect is more of a this Maoist terror also, because many of the times, even if you try, perhaps these locals will not speak about the trauma they are going through. They want to get out of this. They don't want this bloodshed, because they are literally being sandwiched from both the sides, and they want to get out of it, but there is an element of terror. So it's a very precarious situation when it comes to the real human rights, because otherwise, what is the reason that these so-called civil society activists are having control over tribal land? They are having they have got their own plush constructions there, but state agencies cannot do that. It's a very, and as Dr. Behera also said, the land acquired, it actually started with the land distribution issue. Now that is completely gone. It is a criminal syndicate that is working with a parallel economy and parallel model of governance. But unfortunately, media is either blind towards it, or not able to access to the atrocities committed by the Maoists on the tribals.
Thank you. My question to Alokji is, actually Prafulji has raised a very important and interesting point, and couple of people on the chat also are asking about it. Why not call them terrorists simply? If they're committing the violence, because there is an aspect of terror, as Prafulji is mentioning, and whether the similar strategies, Alokji, from a security perspective will be useful. And there is also a mention that there is attempt to legitimize the violence, and as human rights organization, our fundamental building block is peace and human development and other things. So how can someone legitimize the violence, and how can someone counter such a strategy in order to bring the peace there? And what should be our strategic approach to all these things? You are on mute, I guess, Alokji.
Firstly, we need to distinguish between the foot soldiers and the ideologues of the movement. If somebody is actually guilty of terrorism, it is the ideologues and the leadership of the movement, which are actually instigating these foot soldiers to indulge in wanton acts of violence. The fact is, foot soldiers have genuine grouses, they don't understand, and they have been driven. Now, if you actually start treating the foot soldiers, who are the poor tribals, as your enemies, then you will be actually alienating them. And that's where it is not prudent. It's neither advisable nor a prudent thing. Yes, as far as the leadership is concerned, those who are committed hardcore, in fact, it's feasible to actually, if you actually can explain your viewpoint to the tribals, you can actually win them over. And I agree with Prafulji that one of the reasons why the Maoists are not allowing development there is because they know that if the development comes in, the poor tribals will be aware of what's happening. And then this Maoist propaganda will fall flat. Also with the development, probably, now this is actually a hope that probably with the development that comes in, they would be also in a position to get expeditious justice. As I told you, justice is a very, very key issue. And I think a tribesman, a tribal individual must get that feeling that they're getting the justice. That part has to actually come. And to that extent, the bureaucracy that exists in those areas needs to be sensitized to this need for an expeditious justice. We cannot have these delayed cases lingering on for decades, for generations, without justice being delivered. That's one issue which I think needs to be.
Thank you, Alokji. So we are almost coming to close. So I'll request closing remarks, and I'll raise a couple of important questions. It's a very wide and big topic, actually, and there are several facets to it. And Alokji raised the issue of justice, and also Dr. Behera raised the issue of negotiations. And so there are human rights violations happening there. There are some political ideologies at work which are impacting the Human Development Index, and then there has to be a expeditious justice from the bureaucracy, and one of the solutions Dr. Behera ji very kindly mentioned was negotiations. Having said that, I would like to raise my skepticism here a little bit, and then also would like to invite closing remarks from Prafulji and Dr. Behera ji. Recently, as recent as a couple of days back, we have seen some of the pamphlets were circulated for amongst some of the reservation lobbies in Maharashtra by Maoists. So are they trying to now, and then they have been, the pamphlets have been suggesting some of the caste theirs to take up to arms to solve their issues. So the point is that this is really a challenging and really complex set of circumstance where they're trying to make use of some of the caste discriminations, and rather than looking at it from a human development point of view, they are looking at it completely from a political point of view and trying to really play one caste against other. So whether the justice and negotiation, whether they are going to solve the problem, or there has to be some sort of a robust political response, grassroots democracy. Closing remarks, please. Prafulji, Dr. Behera ji, and Alok ji.
See, I would like to make one important distinction here: the ideological transformation that has taken place from Marxism to Maoism and now cultural Marxism. See, please try and understand, it is not just about caste. It is about using all kinds of fault lines in the society, whether it is on the basis of race. It's as Black Lives Matter campaign we have seen. It was not by the, essentially by the, it was by the left organizations, ultra left organizations in the US. I'm not saying the issues are not genuine, but it can be gender, it can be caste, it can be, in case of South India, it will be region and the Dravid, the so-called Dravidian identity. It can be any issue. It is basically the new kind of technique to use subcultural identities to target any umbrella identity. It's a typical, a cultural revolutionist paradigm, or rather see, if you see the origin of cultural studies, it says the purpose of cultural studies is not to study the culture, but to create a new one. What is that new one is never defined. But challenging the hegemonic culture is common to them. So they will define what is hegemonic, and then they will create certain peripheral identities to pick up arms against this so-called hegemon. In case of India, it can be Indian state, it can be Brahminical order, it can be patriarchal order, it can be Hindutva paradigm. They will name it differently for different groups, but the target will be the same: the Indian state and Indian democracy. So please try and understand that this is a totally different kind of modus operandi and ideological paradigm, and we have to, as Alokji rightly said, we have to understand the ideology. It is not just a security perspective that is going to help. It is a completely a distant, or rather in present day I would call it mutant ideological movement. It has mutated from classical Marxism to Maoism to cultural Marxism. So unless you understand this mutant variety of Maoism, you will not be able to deal with it.
Thank you, Prafulji. Thank you for those remarks. Dr. Behera ji, your closing remarks, please.
Yeah, taking from Prafulji. So what you see is that the formation of the class bringing different classes together, which are necessarily kind of guided by an anti-state sentiment. So the common enemy factor actually works here. Okay, so how do you delegitimize it? So one thing is that when there is a security kind of approach needed to fight them militarily at the ground, there is also an intellectual approach needed to actually delegitimize the so-called intellectuals who actually give justification to all sorts of kind of violence. One needs to I've been doing it in my book. You will see the next book that is coming, More Than Maoism. You'll see that how all of these pundits who have never visited Vastar talk about Vastar. Okay, so we have examples of the NDTV journalist who actually visited Odisha just for 24 hours and came out and wrote a book. Okay, I have my 20 years of experience in writing on Maoism, starting from Nepal till India. I have not been able to write a authored book. I have written an edited one, but I do not have the courage or the expertise so far. I feel a little nervous. But that needs to be actually called. People do not go. One thing Prakulji was mentioning, that why the media do not have the access. I would say that the so-called media sitting in the urban centers, they are ignorant. Okay, they are ignorant, and this ignorance cocktailed with a kind of an anti-state mindset is a dangerous kind of combination. Okay, that is where they give a culture out of kind of an image, out of imagination most of the time. Coming to the ground, how do you do it? Bring in small changes. This has been written to the government time and again, that every government office at the local level need to have a local person. Recruit your local boys and the girls. They will be able to communicate to the people. Okay, once they start communicating about the government things, you will see the support base of the Maoist will drastically come down. Okay, that has actually taken place. And one more last thing I'll say, let's give a lot of credit to the local people. Okay, yes, we have security-wise, we have brought them, we have got them to the sides. But at the same time, my study says, I have been traveling extensively in these areas. The local people have started rejecting the idea of violence. Okay, let's give it to them. Okay, they are the ones who are not subscribing the so-called revolutionary violence anymore. Okay, the Pathalgatti movement, okay, doesn't have the kind of support for the Maoist. The Niyamgiri thing, when the Maoist came, the people like Jagannath Majil or the Sikaka, they said, you have no business here. And I have witnessed it in my own naked eyes. They have no business here. You please go back. This is our movement. Whatever that's in a democratic way, they didn't pick up arms. Okay, they of course they fought against some development project, but they didn't take up arms. Okay, with such kind of people, you can always negotiate, you can always talk. Okay, so that is where, okay, let's communicate to the local people one-to-one. You don't need this, civil society organization. You don't need mediatories. Okay, you need the local boys and girls coming to their village, going to their village and talking to their people. You will see this problem because, your first line of defense, your own people, not any security forces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for their remarks. And we purely took up this particular issue because we want peace and prosperity in that particular region. And peace is one of the fundamental building blocks for any social development or economic development. And because of that, we wanted to have this academic conversation where we explore the various facets of it. As you might have imagined, the topic is very broad, and we'll continue to explore that from an academic perspective and continue to explore various facets of the topic. And Dr. Behera, I assure you that when your book will come out, we would like to hear more about your book and take a deep dive into that. We had a lot of audience from Europe as well as US also patiently listening to our conversation and also contributing through their questions. And some of them we have covered, many of them we couldn't cover, but this is first a lecture in this particular series. We'll continue with that. With that, I would like to thank all our speakers and panelists. I would like to thank Alok ji, Praful ji, Dr. Behera ji, and I would like to say that now the session is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Praful ji. All of you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Anshuman Behera ji. Thank you so much.